Hello, this is Jamie Lammers coming back to you with another part of the gender diversity training. Part 2 will be interacting with the gender diverse. This is trying to help you readapt to some cultural assumptions, understandings, and interactive expectations so that you can find a better, more positive way of interacting with the gender diverse and have better outcomes when needing to interact with the gender diverse. So the first thing that I would want to do is we want to look at the golden rule of interaction, and that is that we want to use cultural humility. Cultural humility is very important. It's this understanding and idea that we are always lifelong self-evaluating, trying to improve, always knowing that we're not going to get things right, that we have to keep finding where we're getting things wrong and advancing and growing. It also is of cultivating new perspectives, new ideas, so that you can keep growing the different ways that you can see the world. Focus on the validation of others over the validation of ourselves. Also trying to put an active effort into balancing the power between different individuals. And also trying to create partnerships with diverse advocates so that you can gain understanding and support. The first thing we want to look at is the different types of interaction that we can have with individuals. This is the different interactions in terms of how we're communicating. We'll get to physical interventions at the end. The first one would be verbal interactions. Verbal interactions is dealing with words versus tone and inflection, connotations versus denotations, paralanguage. Now, you most likely have a lot of training already in this area. You've already been taught to watch how you say your words, watch what inflections you use. I'm not sure if it's the connotation versus denotation is understood, but it's the idea of that there's a literal definition of the word that denotes the word, and then there's a connotation. I always get those two mixed up, I think. And then there's one part that actually is like how the word feels or what the little nuances of the word are. A good example is you could say something is large or you could say something is fat. And fat has a more negative connotation to it than large would be. And so that connotation versus denotation is important. Paralanguage is very important when we're talking. We want to look at how we're talking in terms of speed, the pauses we have between words, the volume that we use, the high versus low context. We live in a very low context type of society. High context societies, though, will have this they read into words a lot. They will see a lot of meaning behind a very few words. And so we have to be very careful if we're dealing with people that we understand the variation of context. And pauses really matter. I had a foreign exchange student who once would tend to tell us all the time, oh, this is interesting. And in our society, in a micro society here, that usually means I don't like it because there's a pause before interesting. But she actually was pausing because she was trying to find a better word and she wasn't able to find it. And so that pause caused a miscommunication because of the cultural context. So we want to actually look at these different ways of verbally communicating, which I'm sure you have. You also probably had a lot of training in terms of nonverbal communication. We're dealing in how we hold our face, how we hold our arms, the posture we have, the positioning in the room and to the people we're talking to, all the different movements that we have, because all these things will provide information to people as to what we're saying, give reflections. I'm doing right now with my hands and my face and all that stuff. I'm giving you lots of information as to all these various things using nonverbal communication, distance the camera. If I was like really close here versus really far back, you're going to have a different feel to all this. But also the symbols, the clothing that you wear and the accessories that you use. These all are also nonverbal communications. A good example is I don't have it now, but I had like my hands painted in the trans colors. I have, wrong side, this side, the rainbow behind me, which a lot of people would interpret as a sexual diversity symbolism. The various pins or badges, various markings or accessories, various colors, they all give communication. And they're a communication that people who are gender diverse are looking for. They are wanting somebody who they can feel safe with. They are wanting somebody who can understand them. They are wanting somebody who will not judge them poorly or wrongly, who will misinterpret the information that they're wanting to provide, and they want somebody who will respect them. And so these symbols and these colors and accessories, they speak out. And so seeing them on other people, get used to these symbols. I mean, we can deal with symbols in the future if you want. I could go through a whole 15 minutes of just the symbols that individuals have that will tell you about that individual. But also, I want to actually focus on this idea of absence as well. Lack of verbal and nonverbal communication. This most of the time happens when we are caught off guard, when something happens we don't understand, and we actually will pause and we will stop. We usually, it's like kind of a, I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm not going to do anything kind of thing. These are usually seen as very negative. And so not being already schooled in how to react and interact with people. If you're being hesitant, if you're not giving them feedback, if you're not giving them the normal cultural um, um, interactions, verbal and nonverbal, then that's going to be weighing quite heavy. And so it's oftentimes a lot more influential when you're dealing with the gender diverse, the absence of saying something. This comes from a study that is often worded. It's used incorrectly quite often. The study was when information is conflicting. In other words, what you say, how you say it, and the body language you're using. If they all say something completely different, which one is the person most likely to believe in first? And when they studied it, they had somebody do that. They have somebody make sure that they give a different words from how they're saying the words, from the body language they're using to convey three totally different ideas. And lo and behold, most people believed in the body language before anything else. Then the second most likely thing that people believed in is how they said the words, and very few actually believed in the words. But usually we tend to focus on the opposite. We think as long as we get the words right, this is correct. This is not true. We have to be very careful about how we say our words, of the body language we give, the absence of our communications, the paralanguages that we're using. It is all those things that are actually going to make or break your interaction with someone who's gender diverse. We are all very hyper aware. We're looking for the next danger. We're all concerned that somebody's going to do something to us, especially someone of authority. And so we are wanting to make sure that we give them the right communication in the parts that they're most likely to believe. The body language, how you speak it, the paralanguage, making sure you don't get absence of communication, things like that. Now, why are we so hyper aware? Well, most of us tend to be what you could call trauma victims. So basically, if someone is gender diverse, there's a good chance they are a trauma victim. That's what this is kind of getting at. And so we have to follow this idea that someone has a lot of trauma reactions to the world around them. They're going to be very socially hyper aware. They're going to be emotionally moderating other people, trying to figure out if these other individuals are a danger, a friend, a foe, a support, an ally, an advocate, because there's make or break of all this. There's lots of individuals get assaulted. There's, I think it was in Sheboygan County, a third of people that we had surveyed, if I remember the numbers right, had said that they've been physically harassed or things like that due to their gender diversity. They also tend to have a lot more sensitive emotionally because of the re-traumatizations that occur. So these people will get more emotional. They will get more easily startled. So moving too quickly will get them kind of jumpy, if you will. These are just normal trauma type things, remember. They also quickly will resort to going to that idea of blind agreement. They will just go along with whatever you have to say, uncomprehendingly in a way. They kind of shut down their higher functionings and just go along with things. So you won't get true information necessarily from them because they're not actually thinking about their answers. They're just auto answering. They will start avoiding eye contact. They will start avoiding getting touched. They will tend to distance themselves physically. You can start seeing where this can be a problem. All these things can lead to someone being suspicious of someone, thinking that they're doing something wrong, thinking that they're doing something illegal, immoral, unethical, when in all actuality, the person is just trying to protect themselves quite often. So be aware that there's a lot of gender diverse people who are trauma victims and will have these types of behavioral patterns. And don't just automatically assume it's because they are got something against them. When interacting with them, I would suggest the quick one to think about is the set-up method. Set-up is support, empathy, truth. Up is understanding and perseverance. Basically, what this means is when you're talking with them, you want to make sure you show that you're supporting them. You want to make sure you have that supportive connection. I am here to help you. I want to support your minority status, your diversity. Empathy, I know it's hard. I know that you have difficulty dealing with positions of power, of authority. I know that this is a very trying time. I know that you probably have a lot of sensitivity and are feeling overwhelmed. And then give them the truth, whatever it is that you're there to talk to. But I do have to search your house. But I do have to ask you some questions. But I do have to ask you to come with me or to step outside or whatever it is. If you give the set method, you will more likely get them to comply than if you did not. This is used for anyone who's you're trying to give information they might not be willing to accept. The up portion of this is what you do for yourself. Up stands for understanding. You need to understand the person. This is kind of what I'm trying to help you do. If you understand the person you're dealing with, if you understand the situation, then you're more likely to get a positive outcome. Understanding is huge, and you're always trying to work towards better understanding. Perseverance, basically what this means is that a lot of people will pressure us against us. Don't be, living into all this. Don't be encouraging them. Don't be so on and so forth. Just get it over with. We're going to get pressure to do it differently. Persevere. Stay the course. Stay supportive. Stay empathetic before you give in that truth. Make sure you provide and keep working on that understanding and keep that perseverance of trying to do it this more friendly method rather than getting pressured by others to just screw it kind of thing. The thing that I'm sure a lot of you want to know about is physical interventions. If you physically interact with someone with gender diversity, what should you do? Now, of course, I could go into this more detail. All these things I could go into more detail. Anything that people want more detail, please get it back to me so that I know to give you more detail. That'd be something I'd be more willing to do. Anyways, physical interactions. The first thing you have to remember, they will be more resistant than normal individuals for physical interactions. This is because our bodies are not comfortable to us. We don't like what we have going on quite often in our body, and we're trying hard to make changes. So anyone touching our body usually is someone who could potentially see the parts of us or feel the parts of us that we are most ashamed of. We tend to want to distance ourselves from people so that you won't have that problem. Quite often when we do have someone touching us, we tend to freeze up more often than we fight or flee. This is due to this idea of, are you a predator or a prey? And minority statuses, especially minority statuses without protective rules in place for us to stop things like this from potentially occurring, will often take the prey route of freezing more often than trying to fight or flee. So you will quite often have people stiffen up or become very tight and rigid and unable to move around very easily. When you can, try to explain why you need to touch someone before you have to touch them. If possible, use the setup method to try and get them to understand. The more likely that you can get them to understand why you have to do this, why you have to do your job, then it is more likely that they will be more willing to work with you. One of the big things about transgender people, though, that you have to remember is that they often use assistive devices to affirm their gender. This means physical things that you will find that you will not be used to finding on an individual if you do like a search or something. Things are like binders, packers, gaffs, shapewear. Binders are devices that flatten the chest. They kind of like a girdle, but for the chest area, very stiff, very hard. Packers are a false form of genitalia that are used by transgender men. Gaffs are a type of undergarment, lower undergarment, that are used by transgender women to make things more appropriate looking for their gender. Shapewear is just any sort of thing that has padding in it, extra padding, or pressing in various ways to make a different shape of the body. It's highly embarrassing for these things to be found, to be focused on, to be brought out openly. Think of just how you would talk to someone with genitalia, about with genitalia. Talk to someone who has, excuse me, how you would talk to someone about their genitalia, and think of that as the same way you would talk to them about these devices. If you need to do some sort of search, think of it as the same way you would have to search someone in the genitals region, because these things are that personal to these individuals. Now, of course, everybody probably thought of, what about the pronouns? Well, we can do those real quick. He, him, she, her. There's also the pronouns they, them. They, them is a singular form. I would suggest to anyone to start getting used to using the terms they and them and their and theirs to use on anyone that you meet until they give a strong indication of a he, she, or they type of stance. If you don't, then you're likely to get the gender wrong in a very major way rather than just a minor way. You also get some people telling you that their pronouns are he, they, or she, they. It's okay to ask pronouns if you don't know. What pronouns would you like to use would be a common thing, but we can go over those in more detail at a future lesson. So he, they, and she, they are basically people who say you could use he or they as a pronoun for me, or she and they as a pronoun for me, because they kind of see themselves as a bit more of a non-binary feminine, non-binary masculine type of individual. The three in the bottom, sie, zer, zim. Oh, sie, zim, zers. Then sie, here, here's. And then the third one is sie, zir, zirs. These are all neutral or non-binary or third gender type of pronouns. You don't come across those as often around, especially in our Sheboygan area, but people do use these sometimes. Basically, if you hear them using it, you use them as well. If you can, we can get some more practice in that potentially in the future. There's also Mr., Mrs., Miss, but there's also a neutral form mix. So in other words, I am Mix Jamie Lammers. If you wanted to say Mr. or Mrs., that's not quite right. You can use Mrs. because I go by she, them. So in other words, you could use she or you could use them. But quite often I tend to use the mix instead of the Mrs. if I had a choice. And then the quick touch on names so that you aren't too confused. Quite often names are important to us gender diverse individuals, especially transgender individuals. It gives us validation as to who we are because names quite often are linked to gender. So people will usually use the term actual names or sometimes preferred names, though preferred names is kind of getting phased out some to the term actual name, as to be the name that was chosen and that they now use to refer to themselves and have others refer to them. This may be different from their legal name. Their legal name is what's on the documents, of course, driver's license and birth certificate and whatnot, but the actual name may have been changed to be the legal name as well. So it's not bad when you go up to someone to ask for their actual name and their legal name. I would not suggest asking for name assigned at birth. This would be dead naming someone, as the word is under there. Dead naming an individual basically is a slang term for using the name that no longer is used by them. It is usually the name assigned at birth that is no longer being used, especially if it's been legally changed. And so don't be using that dead name or asking for the dead name. Stick with the actual name and the legal name and ask for both. You also probably should ask for their actual gender and their legal gender, just like you were asking about the name. That one I didn't put in there, but that would be a good one. Again, anything that you would want me to talk about, please let me know. Otherwise, be safe out there.